It is one of the most intimate songs ever recorded. From the very first gentle descending notes of the electric piano, it creates a private, smoky, almost sacred space. It's a song that feels like a confession, a secret whispered between two people in a dark room. When Roberta Flack sings the opening line, strumming my pain with his fingers, her voice is not a performance, it's a testimony. It's a song that millions of people have claimed as their own, a universal anthem for that specific, spine-chilling moment. When a piece of music feels so personal, it seems the artist has somehow read your diary. It's a song about you. But what if that story, that intimate, almost painfully personal confession, isn't her story at all? What if the woman who made the song immortal wasn't the woman who lived it? What if the song itself is a perfect whispered echo, a story passed from one artist to another, and then to another, each one adding a new layer of truth, a new coat of paint, until the original spark was almost forgotten? This is not just the story of a hit song. This is the story of a telephone, a creative journey that spans three distinct artists, two coasts, and one unforgettable performance. It is the secret history of killing me softly with his song. Our story begins not in the hallowed halls of soul music, but in the heart of the early 1970s singer-songwriter boom. The 1960s, with its loud, electric, communal shouts for revolution, had ended. The dream, for many, had fractured at Altamont and Kent State. A new, more introspective mood was setting in. Author Tom Wolfe called it the Me Decade, a time when the cultural focus shifted from we to I. The music of the day reflected this shift perfectly. The new gods were not stadium rock messiahs. They were confessors. They were men and women with acoustic guitars and pianos, their voices unadorned, their lyrics plumbing the depths of their own private lives. This was the era of Carole King's Tapestry, a blockbuster album that felt like a conversation with an old friend. It was the era of Joni Mitchell's Blue, a record of such stark, personal honesty that it felt almost painful to listen to. It was the era of James Taylor, whose gentle voice and public vulnerability made him a new kind of superstar. The center of this new universe, its church, was a small, dark club on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood, the Troubadour. This was the proving ground. This was the stage where artists like Elton John made their American debut, where James Taylor and Carole King honed their craft. To play the Troubadour was to have arrived. And into this world stepped a young, unknown singer-songwriter named Lori Lieberman. She was 19 years old, a recent transplant to Los Angeles, armed with a guitar and a book of deeply personal poetry. She was, in every way, a perfect product of her time, sensitive, introspective, and searching for a way to turn her feelings into art. But Lieberman was not just another struggling artist. She had, in a sense, already been discovered. She had been signed to a production and management deal with two men who were, in every way, her opposite. They were not young, struggling folk artists. They were the old guard. They were professional, successful, East Coast hitmakers. Their names were Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox. Gimbel was the lyricist, Fox the composer. They were seasoned veterans of the Brill Building and Tin Pan Alley, the old-school song factories that had pumped out hits for decades. They were not confessional artists. They were craftsmen. Their job was to write hits, and they were exceptionally good at it. Their list of credits would eventually include the theme songs for Happy Days, and Laverne and Shirley Gimbel had even written the English-language lyrics for the global bossa nova smash, The Girl from Ipanema. They had signed Lori Lieberman, seeing in her a raw, authentic talent they could mold. They were producing her debut album, and the arrangement was unusual. They would write the songs for her, but they would attempt to base them on her life, on her poems, on her experiences, to maintain that crucial singer-songwriter authenticity. It was a commercial approximation of the very movement she wanted to join. This brings us to the inciting incident, the moment the first domino fell. Sometime in late 1971, Lori Lieberman went on a date to the Troubadour. The artist she was there to see was Don McLean. Now, Don McLean was not just any folk singer. He was, at that exact moment, perhaps the biggest singer-songwriter on the planet. He was riding the massive global wave of his epic American Pie, a song that had obsessed a generation. The club was packed. The air was electric. McLean, as Lieberman would later recall, was charismatic, handsome, and held the room in the palm of his hand. But it wasn't the big, boisterous hit that struck her. It was a quieter moment in his set. After the sing-alongs, McLean sat alone on his stool, his voice hushed, and played a different song. It was a song from that same album, a deep, mournful, and devastatingly sad track called Empty Chairs. Empty Chairs is a song of profound loss and regret. It's about a relationship ending, about the spaces where a person used to be. The lyrics paint a picture of a man wandering alone through a cold, empty house, seeing the ghosts of a love that's gone. McLean sang, "I can't believe that you would leave your picture, your reflection in my mind." Lori Lieberman sat in the darkness, and something broke. She was, at that time, in the middle of her own difficult, complicated relationship. Reportedly with her manager and producer, Norman Gimbel, she felt trapped, unhappy, and deeply unseen. And as Don McLean sang his song, a song he had written about his own life, Lori Lieberman felt as if he had torn open her chest and read her mind. She felt he was singing directly to her. She felt that he knew her story, her pain, her secrets. It was a profound, almost mystical connection, that moment every music lover craves, as she later described it. He was killing me. He was singing my life. She was so moved, so shaken, that she couldn't even applaud. As the crowd erupted, she sat in stunned silence. She went home, and, in a moment that has become music legend, she grabbed a napkin from her purse, and on that napkin, she began to write. She wasn't writing a song, she was a poet. She was scribbling down her feelings, trying to capture the raw, overwhelming experience of that moment. The poem she wrote was titled, "Killing Me Softly with His Blues." The poem was a direct, literal transcript of her experience. It described a man on a stage, a stranger who somehow knew her. She showed this poem to her producers. She presented this raw piece of her heart to Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox. Gimbel, the professional lyricist, saw the potential immediately. He saw that phrase, "killing me softly," and he knew it was a killer hook. He took her poem, her raw, confessional diary entry, and began to do what he did best. He polished it. He universalized it. He kept her core idea, the feeling of a singer exposing her life. But he changed his blues to his song, a small but crucial tweak that made it broader, more accessible. He and Charles Fox then sat down and, using Lieberman's poem as the blueprint, they crafted a beautiful, sophisticated, and commercially viable folk song. In 1972, Lori Lieberman recorded "Killing Me Softly with His Song" for her debut album. Her version is beautiful. It's a gentle, acoustic, straightforward folk ballad, sung with the sincere, fragile voice of a 19-year-old. It's the sound of the troubadour. It's the sound of a young woman's confession. The album was released, and like so many thousands of debut albums, It went almost completely unnoticed. The song, the first original version of this future standard, vanished without a trace. The song was now a secret once again. It was a message in a bottle, tossed into the ocean by a folk singer and her producers, waiting for someone to find it. And the person who would find it was about to board an airplane, an event that would change music history forever. While Lori Lieberman's song was fading into obscurity on the West Coast, a very different kind of artist was at the absolute peak of her powers on the East Coast. This was Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack was not a 19-year-old folk ingenue. She was a woman in her mid-30s, a deeply sophisticated, classically trained musician born in North Carolina. She was a child prodigy who had reportedly been playing piano at age 9, and by 15, she had earned a full music scholarship to Howard University, where she studied classical piano and voice. After graduating, she became a teacher in Washington, D.C., but by night, she was a fixture at local clubs. Her style was, and is, almost impossible to categorize. It wasn't the raw, gritty gospel of Aretha Franklin, nor the pop sheen of Motown. It was something more internal, more complex. It was a fusion of soul, classical, jazz, and folk, delivered with a meticulous, almost academic precision that was nonetheless brimming with deep, controlled emotion. She was an interpreter, a musical intellectual, who deconstructed songs and rebuilt them in her own image. By 1972, Roberta Flack was a superstar. Her 1969 debut album, First Take, had been a slow-burn success until Clint Eastwood famously featured one of its tracks, Ewan McCall's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, in his 1971 film Play Misty for Me. The song was released as a single, and it became a global sensation, a massive Grammy-winning #1 hit. It was the quintessential Roberta Flack performance, slow, sparse, almost agonizingly intimate. She had followed this up with another hit, Where Is the Love, a duet with Donny Hathaway. She was at the top of the charts, the new, sophisticated Queen of Soul. And in 1972, she was on an airplane, flying from Los Angeles to New York. This is the second crucial chance event in our story. Like so many flights at the time, the plane offered an in-flight audio program. Flack put on her headphones, a set of bulky 1970s-era cans, and began to tune through the channels. Most of it was the standard fare. But then, on the folk channel, a song came on that made her stop. It was a gentle acoustic ballad, sung by a young woman with a fragile, sincere voice. It was, of course, Lori Lieberman's debut album, and the song she was hearing was Killing Me Softly with His Song. Roberta Flack was thunderstruck. The song hit her with the same force it had hit Lori Lieberman at the Troubadour, but in a different way Lieberman had felt, he's telling my story. Flack, the great interpreter, felt, this is a story I must tell. She was completely mesmerized by the lyrics, strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song. She recognized the profound, universal truth in that phrase. It was the same feeling she tried to create in her own audience. It was the very definition of a perfect song, a perfect story. According to the legend, she couldn't get it out of her head. She spent the entire flight listening to it on repeat, scribbling down the lyrics on a cocktail napkin, trying to memorize its structure. By the time the plane landed, she was a woman possessed. She knew, with the unshakable certainty of a master artist, that this song was hers. It wasn't just a song she wanted to sing. It was a song she felt she was meant to sing. When she landed, she immediately began a quest, not unlike Paul McCartney's paranoid search for the owner of Yesterday, but Flack's was a quest of acquisition she had to find this song. She called her producers, Joel Dorn and Arif Mardin. She called her contacts at Atlantic Records. She described the song she had heard, a folk ballad by a singer she'd never heard of. Eventually, they tracked it down. The song was by Charles Fox and Norman Gimbel, as performed by Lori Lieberman. Flack got her hands on the original record and began to do what she did best. She began to deconstruct it. She loved the song, but she didn't love the arrangement. Lieberman's version was, to Flack's ears, a beautiful sketch, but it wasn't the final painting, it was a folk song, and Roberta Flack was not a folk singer. She heard something else in it. She heard a groove. She heard a heartbeat. She heard soul. She took the song to her band, the men she had been working with for years, including the brilliant keyboardist and arranger, Ron Carter. She brought it into the studio, and for months, she and her band worked it. This was not a quick recording. This was a deep, methodical, almost obsessive exploration. They tried it fast. They tried it as a reggae song. They tried it with a driving, upbeat tempo. But nothing felt right. It felt forced, disrespectful to the intimate nature of the lyrics. Flack was getting frustrated. The song was resisting her. The breakthrough came, as it so often does, when they stopped pushing and started listening. Roberta sat down at the piano. She slowed the tempo way down. She returned to the song's intimate, confessional core. But instead of the bright, major-key folk chords of the original, she began to explore a darker, more melancholic, minor-key harmony. She found a new groove, a slow, subtle R&B pulse, a gentle, descending bass line that felt like a sigh. She added a soft, simple backbeat from the drums, just a hi-hat and a snare, played with brushes, not sticks. And she started to sing it, not as a 19-year-old girl, but as a 35-year-old woman, with all the emotional weight, nuance, and control that her classical training and life experience afforded her. This was the turning point. This was the moment Killing Me Softly was reborn. It was no longer a folk confession. It was becoming a timeless, soulful masterpiece. The song's journey was not over. It had been born from a poem, turned into a folk song, and was now in the laboratory, being reinvented by a master. Roberta Flack's studio process was the polar opposite of a spontaneous jam session. It was a slow, methodical, almost architectural process. She was an alchemist, patiently searching for the precise combination of elements that would turn a simple song into gold. For months, Killing Me Softly was her obsession. She and her band, led by the gifted Ron Carter, lived with the song. They would play it for hours, testing its limits, searching for its hidden pulse. The breakthrough, as Flack has recalled, came when they decided to stop performing the song and start feeling it. They slowed the tempo down to a near stop, a tempo that most pop producers would have rejected as dead on arrival. It became a ballad, but one that simmered with a restrained, internal groove. This tempo change was the first stroke of genius. It shifted the song's entire emotional center. Lori Lieberman's version, with its gentle, forward-moving folk strum, felt like a story being recounted. It was a memory. Roberta Flack's version, with its deliberate, slow-motion pulse, felt like the event was happening in real time. The listener wasn't hearing a story about a performance. They were in the club, listening alongside her, experiencing the emotional impact as it happened. With the tempo set, Flack began to build the song's iconic sound. She moved away from the acoustic guitar that defined the original. Instead, the song's heart became the Fender Rhodes electric piano. This was a sound that defined 1970s soul. Its notes were not bright and percussive like an acoustic piano. They were warm, round, and bell-like, with a slight, hazy shimmer. The opening chords, played by Flack herself, became one of the most famous introductions in music history. It's not an announcement, it's an invitation, the sound of a curtain opening on a private, dimly lit scene. Then came the rhythm section. Ron Carter, a legendary jazz bassist, crafted a bass line that was a masterpiece of sublime minimalism. He didn't just play the root notes, he played gentle, melodic, descending phrases that moved in perfect counterpoint to the vocal. The bass line itself feels like a sigh, a slow, sad shake of the head. It adds a profound layer of melancholy that the folk original never had. And the drums, played by Grady Tate, were equally restrained. There's no heavy backbeat, no rock and roll crash. It's the subtle, intimate shh of a brushed snare and the delicate chick of a hi-hat, a rhythm that feels more like a heartbeat than a drum kit. Into this smoky, atmospheric, and incredibly sparse arrangement, Roberta Flack stepped to the microphone. And this is where the alchemist performed her final, most powerful transformation. Lori Lieberman, with her young, fragile voice, had sung the song as a confession of a star-struck girl. It was beautiful and sincere, but it was the sound of a fan looking up at a stage. Roberta Flack sang it as a confession of a woman and as a peer. She was not a fan. She was a fellow artist. When she sang, "Strumming my pain with his fingers," there was a new, devastating layer of meaning. She sang it with a sense of shock, of professional and personal recognition. It was the sound of one master artist recognizing another and being completely undone by it. She wasn't just a girl in a crowd. She was a sovereign, a queen of soul, who had suddenly been brought to her knees. Her vocal performance is a masterclass in control. She never shouts, she never wails. The song's power is not in its volume, but in its intimacy. She delivers the lyrics with a kind of hushed, stunned disbelief. When she sings, "I felt all flushed with fever, embarrassed by the crowd," she draws the listener in so close, you can almost feel her embarrassment, her vulnerability. You feel like you are the only one she is telling this secret to. And then, the harmonies. Flack, a meticulous arranger, layered her own voice, creating a lush, ethereal choir that swells up on the chorus. This chorus, "Killing me softly with his song," is a stunning release of tension. The sparse, intimate verse gives way to this warm, enveloping cushion of voices, as if her internal thoughts are suddenly echoing through the room. The song was now complete. It was no longer a simple folk ballad. It had been reborn. Roberta Flack and her team had taken Lori Lieberman's poem and Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox's song and had dressed it in new, sophisticated, and profoundly soulful robes. They had changed its key, its tempo, its instrumentation, and its entire emotional core. The folk song had become a soul masterpiece. The story of a girl in a club had become a universal anthem of emotional recognition. The journey, which had started with a 19-year-old on a napkin, was now in the hands of a 35-year-old master artist. The song, a commercial failure, was now polished, perfected, and ready to be shown to the world once more. This time, the world would be listening. In 1973, Roberta Flack released her version of "Killing Me Softly" with his song. It was not an explosive, out-of-the-gate pop single. Instead, it moved exactly like the song itself, a slow, deliberate, and hypnotic build that was impossible to ignore. It began to get airplay on R&B stations, where its deep, soulful groove and intimate vocal were a perfect fit. But then, something else happened. The song crossed over. Pop stations, top 40 radio, and even easy listening stations began to pick it up. In a world of glam rock, hard rock, and upbeat bubblegum pop, Flack's song was a radical act of stillness. It was a 4.5-minute pause, a moment of such profound intimacy that it made everything else on the radio sound loud and clumsy. The public reaction was not just positive, it was personal. The song was an avalanche of empathy, that universal spine-chilling feeling that Lori Lieberman had experienced in the back of the Troubadour, the feeling of a stranger on a stage knowing your secrets, was an experience everyone had felt but had never been able to name. Now this song had a name for it. It became an instant anthem for the inner life. People didn't just buy the single, they consumed it. They played it in their homes, in their cars, in bars late at night. It became the definitive make-out song of the 1970s, but it was also a song for profound, private loneliness. It was a song for adults. It wasn't about teenage crushes or dancing in the street. It was about complex, internal, emotional recognition. It was a perfect fit for the me decade, a time when people were turning inward, focusing on their own feelings and personal journeys. The song's climb up the charts was relentless. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 5 non-consecutive weeks. It was a massive global multi-format smash, and then came the awards. The avalanche of commercial success was followed by a critical coronation. At the 1974 Grammy Awards, Killing Me Softly with his song achieved a near-total sweep of the major categories. It won Record of the Year for Roberta Flack, Song of the Year for its writers, Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox, Best Female Pop Vocal Performance for Roberta Flack. It had defeated songs by other titans of the era, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, Jim Croce. It was official. This quiet, soulful ballad was not just a hit. It was a standard, a masterpiece of songwriting and performance Roberta Flack had, for the second time in a row, after The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, won Record of the Year. She was, undeniably, the new standard for sophisticated adult pop. For the songwriters, Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox, this was the ultimate vindication. Their song, which had been born from a 19-year-old's poem and had completely failed to launch just a year earlier, was now Song of the Year. Their old-school Tin Pan Alley craftsmanship, combined with a genuine modern story, had been validated at the highest possible level they had written a true standard. But this avalanche of success had a strange, almost tragic side effect. It completely buried the song's origin story. The public, the millions who loved the song, had no idea who Lori Lieberman was. They had no idea it was about a specific, real-life moment at the Troubadour. They didn't know it was about Don McLean. The song, in the public's mind, belonged to one person and one person only: Roberta Flack. Her performance was so definitive, so completely her own, that she had, in effect, become the song's protagonist. When she sang "Strumming My Pain," the world believed it was her pain. This left Lori Lieberman in a bizarre and painful psychological limbo. She was the ghost in her own machine. She had to watch as her most intimate, personal experience, the story of her being killed softly by a singer in a club, was broadcast to the entire world, winning awards and topping charts, all while being sung by someone else. She was a footnote to her own life story. The creative journey that had begun as an act of pure, confessional poetry had been so successfully translated, polished, and reimagined by Gimbel, Fox, and Flack that the originator of the feeling was rendered invisible. This was the strange, complex power of the song. It was a story so true, so universal, that it no longer belonged to the person it had actually happened to. It now belonged to everyone. The song had become a public utility, a piece of shared cultural DNA. Its journey from a folk whisper to a soulful shout was complete. But the story would not end there. The song's power was so immense that, 2 decades later, it would be resurrected all over again, for an entirely new generation, in an entirely new genre, proving that its core truth was truly and forever timeless. For 2 decades, the story of Killing Me Softly seemed complete. It was, by all accounts, Roberta Flack's song. It was a permanent, beloved fixture on Quiet Storm and adult contemporary radio. It was a classic, a standard, a beautiful piece of 1970s history preserved in amber. Like many songs of its era, it was respected, but for a new generation, a generation raised on the raw, rebellious, and rhythmic energy of hip-hop, it was, perhaps, their parents' music. Then, in the mid-1990s, the song's improbable journey took its most unexpected turn yet. The setting was no longer a folk club or a sophisticated soul studio. It was the streets of New Jersey, the birthplace of a brilliant, socially conscious, and wildly creative hip-hop trio called the Fugees. The Fugees, Wyclef Jean, Pra Michelle, and Lauren Hill, were a potent, fresh force in music. They were the Refugee Camp, a name that proudly proclaimed their Haitian-American heritage and their status as cultural outsiders. Their 1994 debut album, Blunted on Reality, had been a critical darling but a commercial disappointment. They were under intense pressure from their label to produce a hit for their second album. The spark for their biggest hit came, once again, from the act of listening. The exact origin is part of their own mythology. Some accounts say Pras Michel, a dedicated fan of classic soul, was the one who first brought the song to the group. Others say Lauren Hill had a deep love for Roberta Flack's original. Regardless of who found it, they all heard something in the 20-year-old ballad. They didn't just hear a slow jam to be covered. In the DNA of Flack's arrangement, in that slow, steady, heartbeat-like drum pattern, and that hypnotic, descending bass line, they heard a breakbeat. They heard the foundation of a hip-hop track. At the time, sampling was the dominant art form in hip-hop. But the Fugees decided to do something different. They wouldn't just sample Roberta Flack. They would rebuild her song from the ground up using a hip-hop lens. The transformation was immediate and total. They started by finding a new beat. Wyclef Jean, the group's sonic architect, sampled the iconic, shuffling, kick and snare drum break from Bonita Applebum by A Tribe Called Quest, itself a sample from a 1970s soul jazz group. This gave the song an instant, undeniable, head-nodding boom-bap foundation. It took Flack's intimate whisper and gave it a tough, street-level pulse. They kept the Fender Rhodes piano, that signature hazy sound. But in their hands, it felt different. It was less like a 70s lounge and more like a sample, a ghostly echo of the past floating over this new, hard beat. And then, there was Lauren Hill. If Roberta Flack's vocal was a masterclass in control, restraint, and sophisticated interpretation, Lauren Hill's was a declaration of raw, youthful, gut-punch emotion. She was in her early 20s, a woman with a voice that was both ancient and modern. It was husky, powerful, and deeply infused with the gospel and soul traditions, but it carried a new, fiery, hip-hop urgency. She didn't just sing the song, she claimed it. She took Flack's cool, languid phrasing and pushed it, finding new rhythms, adding gospel-inflected runs and raw, aching growls. When she sang, "Strumming my pain with his fingers," you felt the sting. When she belted the chorus, "Killing me softly," it wasn't a hushed confession. It was a soaring, soulful cry that could fill stadiums. To complete the transformation, Wyclef Jean and Pra Michel didn't just sing backup. They framed her performance with the essential elements of a 1990s hip-hop track. Wyclef's ad-libs, one time, two times, were pure hip-hop, a call and response that grounded the song in the refugee camp ethos. They even added a new, spoken-word interlude in the middle. "We used to be a couple. We used to be inseparable." This grounded the song's universal theme in a new, specific, modern story of love and betrayal. This new version of "Killing Me Softly," now simply titled "Killing Me Softly," was released in 1996 as the first single from their upcoming second album, The Score. The public reaction was not just an avalanche, it was a global eruption. The song was everywhere. It wasn't a crossover hit. It was a cultural reset. It was played on pop radio, on R&B radio, on hip-hop stations. Its music video, directed by a young F. Gary Gray, was in constant, heavy rotation on MTV. The song was a monster, topping charts in over 20 countries, including the #1 spot in the UK, Germany, and Australia, and becoming an inescapable airplay giant in the US, where, due to a chart rule at the time, it wasn't eligible for the Hot 100 as a physical single, but was one of the biggest songs of the year. The Score became one of the best-selling hip-hop albums of all time, selling over 22 million copies worldwide, and winning the Grammy for Best Rap Album. Killing Me Softly won the Grammy for Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group. For an entire new generation, Generation X and young millennials, this was the only version of Killing Me Softly that mattered. They had no idea who Roberta Flack was, let alone Lori Lieberman. The song, for them, was a Fugees song, a Lauren Hill song. It was a testament to the song's perfect, undeniable core. Its DNA was so strong that it could be completely redressed in the uniform of a new, rebellious genre, and not just survive, but dominate. The song had, impossibly, done it again. It had captured the specific, intimate feeling of being seen by an artist and had presented it to a new generation. In their own language, the journey that started with a 19-year-old girl watching a folk singer at the Troubadour had now reached its third, and perhaps most public, destination. The Fugees' 1996 version was not just a cover, it was a final cultural coronation. It cemented Killing Me Softly as a standard in the truest sense of the word. A song so perfectly constructed, both lyrically and melodically, that it can be endlessly reinterpreted by new generations and new genres, yet its emotional core remains intact. This triple-pronged journey, from folk to soul to hip-hop, is what makes the song's history so unique. It's a perfect story of creative telephone, a whisper that passed through 3 distinct artistic filters, each one adding a new layer of meaning without erasing what came before. First, we have the originator, Lori Lieberman. She was the spark. She was the one who lived the event. Her contribution was not just the title, but the core concept. That strange, vulnerable, almost embarrassing feeling of a singer's art exposing your private life. Her 1972 recording is the sound of the event itself, a raw, honest, and fragile piece of personal testimony. It is the sound of a 19-year-old girl in a dark club, having her mind read, and it is essential. Without her poem, without her lived experience, the song simply does not exist. But her story also became a cautionary tale about the music industry. For decades, her role was almost completely erased. The official songwriting credits belonged, and still belong, to Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox Lieberman's name is nowhere to be found. She had an agreement with Gimbel and Fox that they would use her poetry and journals to craft songs, but she was not a guild-registered songwriter. She was, in the legal sense, simply the artist performing their material. This led to a long and painful public dispute. As the song became a global standard, Lieberman, understandably, sought acknowledgement for her foundational contribution. Gimbel and Fox, however, have consistently maintained their sole authorship, stating that while Lieberman's experiences may have been an influence, they were the ones who wrote the song, a claim supported by copyright law. This dispute, this very question of who really wrote it, adds another layer of sadness to the song. The woman who sang, "He was singing my life," had her own life story legally and publicly taken from her by the very men she'd first told it to. Then, there is the architect, the man who provided the original pain, Don McLean. He is the ghost in the machine, the unnamed his in With His Song. For years, this part of the story was also lost. Most people had no idea that the song was a direct response to a Don McLean concert. McLean himself, a man who had written his own 8-minute epic in American Pie, was now, unknowingly, the source of another masterpiece. When Lori Lieberman, decades later, finally began to tell her story publicly, the connection was reestablished. Don McLean, upon learning he was the man killing her softly with his song, was reportedly flattered and deeply moved. The creative loop had been closed. The original, unnamed troubadour finally learned of the profound impact his own art had on that one night, in that one club. This brings us to the second face, the master, Roberta Flack. If Lieberman provided the raw emotion, Flack provided the art. She was the alchemist who saw the potential in the simple folk tune. She was the one who understood its depth, its pulse, its soul. She deconstructed it, slowed it down, and rebuilt it as a monument of sophisticated, adult-oriented soul. Her version is the sound of introspection, of a mature woman processing a complex feeling. She transformed the song from a specific story into a universal mood. It was Flack who gave the song its timeless, smoky atmosphere, its heartbeat, its very soul. Her recording is, for most of the world, the definitive text. And finally, we have the resurrector, Lauren Hill. If Flack gave the song its soul, Hill gave it back its fire. She took Flack's controlled, internal masterpiece and turned it external again. She ripped it out of the quiet storm and threw it onto the city streets. Her version is the sound of a new generation, a generation that demands to be heard. It's raw, it's powerful, and it's filled with the youthful, gospel-infused passion that defined 90s R&B and hip-hop. She proved that the song's core, that feeling of being seen by an artist, was just as relevant to a kid in 1996 as it was to a folk singer in 1971. This is the song's true, final verdict. It's not one song, it's 3 songs. It's a folk poem, a soul standard, and a hip-hop anthem, all living inside the same perfect melodic and lyrical structure. The story of Killing Me Softly is a story of telephone, a game where the message, passed from one artist to another, didn't get distorted, but became richer. It's a perfect illustration of how art truly works. It's not a solitary act of genius. It's a conversation. It started with Don McLean, who sang a song, Empty Chairs, about his own pain, a pain so authentic it crossed the stage and unlocked the private grief of a young woman in the audience. That woman, Lori Lieberman, captured that feeling in a poem, a raw, emotional snapshot of a moment. Her poem was then taken by 2 master craftsmen, Norman Gimbel and Charles Fox, who polished that raw emotion into a perfectly structured folk song, a commercially crafted vessel for her feeling. That vessel, a commercial failure, then floated, unheard, until it was discovered on an airplane by a master interpreter, Roberta Flack, who recognized its universal truth. She broke the vessel apart and rebuilt it completely, transforming it from a folk ballad into a timeless soul masterpiece that would conquer the world. And then, 20 years later, that masterpiece was discovered by a new, rebellious generation, the Fugees, who took its soulful core, injected it with a hip-hop beat and a raw, fiery vocal from Lauren Hill, and made it a global anthem all over again. Killing Me Softly is not just a song. It's a relay race where the baton of inspiration was passed from artist to artist, each one running their leg of the journey before passing it to the next. It's a story that proves that the most personal, intimate experiences, a 19-year-old girl feeling alone in a crowd, can, in the right hands, become one of the most universal, shared, and enduring pieces of art in the world. It's a song about the profound, almost terrifying power of music itself, the power of one artist to strum the pain of another, and in doing so, to sing the life of us all. This is what we do here. We unpack the secret histories, the hidden connections, and the forgotten stories behind the songs you love. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive and want to hear more tales of how music history was really made, hit that subscribe button. Because every song has a story, and we're here to tell them.